I'm here with my colleague Paul Antonopoulos. He's in Sydney, Australia. We've got Syrian Girl. You might know her as that, or Partisan Girl, whatever social media platform you're on. But her name is Mimi. She's here with us. She's on the west side of Australia. Is that Perth?
Yes.
But Mimi, tell us a little bit about your political activism in Australia.
Well, I do most of my stuff online. There's only a few things that I could really say I've done in Australia, which is attend rallies and go on Australian television programs. That's the news-related television programs, like the Insight program and another one called Studio 10. Otherwise, most of the stuff I've been doing are online and based overseas, Russian or American.
That's right. You're you classified as a social media activist in that respect. You've got, I think, 50,000 followers on YouTube?
Last time I checked, I don't know if it's gone down, but yeah, yes. And the Twitter and Facebook as well.
So really, what do you think has been your reception online as far as your opinion on Syria and kind of the things that you've said?
Mostly positive. Since 2012, I've had a massive amount of support and people sort of resonate with what I'm saying because I think it's logical. And on the other hand, the mainstream media is constantly contradictory. So, mostly positive, some hate, of course, some death wishes, but other than that, I was surprised at the positivity, actually.
So, I've seen that you've been on Sputnik, I think RT maybe, other Russian stations. You said you were on InfoWars, right? Has the mainstream media actually, except for, I remember seeing that Australian television program that you were on, but besides that, have you actually gotten any attention from the mainstream media, or has it been kind of...
Yes, a few anomalous times I got onto France 24 debate. Yeah. And another time I got on this basically Islamic station in the UK. I don't know if that classifies as mainstream. Furthermore, there was a faux alternative media station called Truthloader, which was run by a British station called ITN that was funding it, but on the surface it seemed like it was alternative media. And I went and I did a debate there. So I suppose it's really the only one that would absolutely count with my France 24 attendance. And I got very heavily censored on that program. My mic was cut. It was supposed to be a debate, but I was up against 3 people. And, they would go to the first guy, go to the second guy, go to the third guy, and sometimes they would just skip me and go straight back to the first guy.
So, do you think...
And I would always be interrupted.
On that part, having you on that debate, do you think that was kind of symbolic to say, oh, we actually are entertaining this debate, but not really?
Yeah, absolutely. But I suppose I expected that, and I think I could live with that because of the platform and how much people were on it. And I also think that anyone who really watched it would notice that I wasn't really allowed to talk and I was interrupted and I was the only one up against 3. So as a matter of fact, if they were trying to appear independent, they shot themselves in the leg.
Well, one can hope that the audience is that observant, right? You mentioned most of your activism was social media activism. In Australia, how popular are your beliefs and the kind of things that you're saying?
This is a difficult question to gauge because people in Australia are generally apolitical. And if they are political, they're very, very political and they know exactly what's going on. And if they're not political, they just don't care about anything. Most of them just don't care about anything. And Otherwise, they would just follow whatever the mainstream media is telling them. ISIS is bad. Like, all they know about the entire Syrian thing is ISIS is bad. I think if you were to ask anyone else, they wouldn't know. Would you concur with that, Paul?
I wouldn't disagree at all, but you know, as Mimi emphasized, most people simply don't care, and the sporadic news reports that are, you know, on in the media is mostly, you know, against the government. So it is a one-sided view, but generally it's not a big issue in Australia.
Now, Paul, you live in Sydney, so that's the complete opposite side of where Mimi lives, but you're in a group in Sydney called Hands Off Syria. One of our former guests, Tim Anderson, is also in that group. As far as the activism in that group, how extensive is that, and how far does the support go for that group in Sydney?
I also joined that group. I'll just chime in there.
I'm also in that group, but you know, I don't live there, so.
I'm actually very new to the group, so you know, our previous guest Tim Anderson has been in it since day one, and luckily we've got plenty of other people that are dedicated to the cause. I won't mention the names here, but I'm sure they'll probably end up being guests on this show soon. But I'm comfortable to say that we're you know, one of the most we're one of the most highly active groups, I would say, across the world. Luckily, they've sent over some people to actually go to Syria and meet people and continue their activism there. So we're pretty lucky in that regard. And with Mimi on the West Coast, Australia's very, very active.
Yes, well,
sorry.
These days we've been producing. No, that's okay. I'll just mention that, you know, at the beginning there was a lot of rallies, but now Hands Off Syria has just basically moved over to online content as well, because we're finding that is it like activist fatigue, and people are just not attending rallies anymore, among other, you know, reasons for the fact that they're not attending. So we've moved on, I suppose, to more online activism.
In that regard, there's only so many rallies you can do before, you know, people either know about it or they don't care about it. So, you know, as the war's progressed, I think activism has also progressed, and it's had to change. You know, the internet is just far too important to ignore. You know, living in a digital age, we can send out messages, you know, far more effectively across Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter than you know, tens of people just rallying in front of a town hall or something like this.
One thing, as an American, first of all, there's like hardly any protests, especially where I live. But to that point, I definitely have to agree with you. I think social media is very important because, from a news standpoint, the point of a protest, as I understand it, is to get the attention of the media to use them against themselves. So that way, let's say you get the press coverage, and then they show it, and inadvertently they cast light on the counter-narrative. And so I think to that point, if you keep protesting, then it's not going to be news anymore, right? So what would be the point of that?
I think that's the point of a small protest. But the point of a big protest is to threaten the government with the stalling of work and school. I think that's... I guess if you're having a small one, yeah, it's all about media, but if you're having a big one, it's all about getting people to stop working and to stop going to school.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I have to agree with that. I mean,
that's the real message to the government.
I think you guys will probably admit it's really hard to get people to organize like that, especially in a society like America and Australia, where most people are, as you said, apolitical and really just don't care. And it takes a certain thing to get people mad enough to do those kind of things. Like in America, we have Donald Trump. I don't know what you guys have, but so let me segue into another question here. What is the Australian government's position on Syria? Because in the United States, as an American, it's very, very easy to tell what's going on. I mean, these presidential debates, I don't know if you guys have heard about them or watched them at all, but I mean, it's not so subtle, these issues. I'll just say that. It's very in your face, and people like to talk about them. People like to make headlines. So it's just in your face all the time. I mean, we had like Marco Rubio the other day say all the Shia are bad and Iran is a Shia death cult, for example. But what Australia's position is it as obvious, let's say, compared to?
No, it's totally not overt at all. I mean, it's been shifting. At the beginning of the war, we had the Labour Party, which is kind of equivalent to your Democrats, and we also have the Liberal Party, which is sort of similar to your Republicans, and it's a two-party system, just like the US system. It pretends not to be, but really it is. The only two parties that have ever won for, I think, since the start of Australia has been Labour and Liberal. Correct me if I'm wrong, Paul. But,
I'm pretty sure, either Labour and Liberal and their predecessors.
Yes. So at the beginning, the Labour Party, which is similar to Democrats, where we have to support the freedom-fighting rebels in Syria, never mind how religious they are or how extremist they are, because the big bad government, then Assad, is killing them all. And, we had people like Bob Carr say that what Syria needs is more assassinations. But still, you don't really have, I'm not sure if it's people just don't pay attention or we don't have enough people vying for power, but statements don't make headlines. The Bob Carr statement was pretty outlandish because it was calling basically for the assassination of a leader of a sovereign power, which is technically illegal under international law. So, that made some headlines, but other than that, we don't really have that kind of political atmosphere. Then later, that government no longer was in power and the Liberals were voted in, and we had Tony Abbott, who was making strong statements, but not against the government, against ISIS specifically. He was saying ISIS is a death cult, we have to go in, they're the worst of two bad options. Some of his quotes made headlines, one of which I thought was interesting. If you don't, I'm probably talking too much about it, but he said, if ISIS doesn't respect borders, then why should we? And it just, goes to show you that he holds Australia to the same moral standard as ISIS. And, then, that, he was saying that in the lead up of Australia deciding to go in to the war in Syria, because they already are in Iraq, their Air Force at least. But then, the US was telling them that they should go into Syria. And the government decided that they would go into Syria. And this was at the same time that Russia was thinking about, there was rumors that they were going to go in as well. And Syrian politicians were actually, for the first time in 60 years or something, interviewed in Australian TV and asked about whether or not Russia was going to enter. And a day after, 2 days or something after Australia agreed to enter, Russia, turns out, was all in. And suddenly, the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, who made all those statements, was deposed. That same day, was removed, and a new guy was put in. And now nobody has mentioned Australia being in Syria anymore. It's out of the question. They're no longer...
I could be incorrect, but I don't think Australia's conducted any airstrikes in Syria once the Russian campaign began.
No,
that's Amy can correct me on that, but
yeah, you're right about that. I think that Tony Abbott probably overcommitted, and Australia didn't sign up for a confrontation with a nuclear power. So it was interesting. This was the coincidence of this was not really ever pointed out. Maybe I'm seeing some link that isn't there, but the same day, the exact same day that Russia entered, because I was trying to get on the Australian media to talk about it, was also the day, and I made a comment, I made a video saying, Tony Abbott said this, but then the next few hours he was no longer in power, and I couldn't use what I was asking anymore.
How did that happen? I mean, how did he just lose power like that? I mean, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't keep up with Australian politics. But
well, with our system, it's very different. The American system, you guys have a president, and the people vote on who the president is. But we don't have that. We have a prime minister, and the people don't vote on the individual. You can only vote in the party. Then the party, the party chooses the prime minister, and they can change their mind anytime.
So effectively, we're voting for the policies of the political party, not a certain individual, which, is a bit in the case in America where each candidate seems to have a different, foreign and domestic policy.
Interesting. What do you think the party leadership turned on him after his statement about wanting to go into Syria?
There was a big build-up on many other issues, which were mostly domestically related. So I personally believe that the Syrian issue had a minor part in him being overthrown by the political party. However, as Mimi pointed out, with the new prime minister that took over, Malcolm Turnbull, the whole build-up of that we're going to start conducting airstrikes against ISIS in Syria just evaporated and never eventuated as soon as the party leadership changed.
Yeah, and I suppose I prefer the Australian way of thinking about it because it's trying to take away from the cult of personality, and the party line isn't that much different from the members in the party. They basically mostly toe the party line. Some of them have corporate backers that are different to others. Like this new guy has some big corporate mining backing, I think. Is that right, Paul?
Yeah.
Not that good. Yeah, so there's nuance differences. I'm not sure. Is it better, Paul, this way, or is it better the US way where they vote for like a cult personality?
Well, it seems that in Australia, with the two-party system, we're just reduced to two different policies. Well, I guess it seems it's a bit more diverse in America, where there's several candidates for one political party, but they've all got different ideas. I mean, we just look at Sanders and how different his line of thinking is to all the other.
Because that hasn't happened in a long time. I think I know what you're about to get into, but I think as far as American politics, I think what has been said for a very long time about American politics by Professor Noam Chomsky has been said for a very long time. I think it's a very good point. Is in America you have two parties, which
Clinton and Bush.
They seem to be very different, and there's a lot of debate between them, and it's very fun. It's almost like watching football, watching these debates between the two candidates. But at the same time, the debate between them is actually so narrow that there is no fringe opinion. There usually is no Donald Trump or no Bernie Sanders. There's no extremists ever. It's two establishment people, and it's almost as if the debate going on is kind of a facade because it's not even real. I mean, if you look at the positions of like Hillary Clinton, she's really not that much different than a George Bush,
So that's an interesting thing. Sorry, Paul.
I was just going to say that's what makes these American elections so interesting now, with the lead up of the Syrian war. With the tides changing since the Russian intervention. I mean, we've got the Donald Trump camp that's just happy to let Russia sort out the mess that America had a huge role in creating. But then we've got the other candidates who are more than happy to expand the war and continue with further intervention and the continuing suffering of the Syrian people. So it's these candidates in America. It's created the most interesting lead up to a presidential election, I would say, in my living memory of American politics.
I think what has been interesting about these developments, and obviously being involved in understanding this conflict personally, it shows me how narrow the debate really is, because there is no every one of these leaders is saying that. I mean, everybody. I mean, I don't know anybody, save for say Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the Arab Gulf states that say they want to get rid of ISIS. I mean, you hear them say it, but it's not true. Every one of the American candidates concurs on that issue. And then you'll hear all of them, even Bernie Sanders talk bad about President Assad. And to me, it shows you that there is no option of just stopping the support for the moderate rebels. I mean, even Bernie Sanders, again, has said we need, and,
What about Trump?
I'm probably going to vote for the guy, but he says we need to arm our, quote, Muslim friends or the other Muslim countries, which is a little bit naive, because you know that Saudi Arabia, first of all, I wouldn't even call them Muslim countries, but it's a little naive to say that even Saudi Arabia would take arms against ISIS.
Well, I have a question actually. Isn't Donald Trump opposed to providing arms to Saudi Arabia, or not? Is he still like, let's arm people?
I'll be honest, I haven't heard his rhetoric about it, but I'll tell you one thing: he has a lot of investments in Saudi Arabia, so I really doubt it.
I think he's probably the best on foreign policy, and probably way better than Sanders, in spite of, I'm not sure about domestic policy, but from what I've heard, foreign policy,
I think
seems good.
You and I might disagree there. I think that Sanders, he is not very well versed on the current state of American foreign policy. I don't really think that he knows, and I think that he's focusing on domestic issues. But what I will tell you is, if we get the money out of politics and if we dismantle the corporate empire in America, then I'm sure that you'll see the war economy completely stop. Because you have to remember that these corporate interests have a foothold in the Pentagon. There is this myth about defense spending in America. Most Democrats will say, yes, we need to get rid of defense spending, we need to cut it down, but they don't even realize what defense spending really is. It's not money given to the military. Most of it is money given to the Pentagon. And what this does, the money given to the Pentagon, will subsidize the future industries in America. Remember that the Pentagon, and this was all, by the way, socialized industry, and it's funny because all of these things were then sold to the private sector. So let's say, like the television or computers, all of these things were invented by the government, by the military, given to people like Boeing, and private companies. That we have. Boeing produces all of these things in the American military. They sell them to us. They sell them back through contracts or whatever. But it's funny because then they'll sell the outdated technology to, let's say, Bahrain or Saudi Arabia, and then they'll look at the American military and say, hey, look it, they've got the same thing as you. Well, you need to upgrade, and then they wax us for money. So I think that dismantling the corporate sector would get rid of that. But to your point, yeah, I think that he doesn't really know what's going on. But if I look at the history of what he said, he's come out against, I don't know if you guys remember Ronald Reagan, but in my opinion,
it's been a while, but yes,
he was the worst American president of all time and killed millions of people. This guy was fighting wars all over the place.
Was he an actor at first?
Yeah.
Yeah, figures.
He was funding terrorism in Iran. All of South America was ravaged by him. We don't even have relations with South America because of his foreign policy. And at the time, then mayor of Burlington, Bernie Sanders, protested against Reagan foreign policy. He actually visited Nicaragua, which I've made comparisons in like the last couple of interviews that we've had with Syria and that country. So I think if Bernie was president, he would probably evolve on that issue, but I think most of his concern has been with domestic policy because in America it's the most pressing issue with the income inequality and the huge gap between the rich and the poor.
I mean, I keep hearing about funding to the Pentagon, but I never hear about stopping funding to the CIA. And I don't know, but I've this is not for certain, this is just a theory of mine, but I feel like the Pentagon and the CIA have been in a little bit of a fight, maybe over Syria as well. Because the Defense Intelligence Agency,
Oh, yeah.
if you recall,
I definitely agree with that.
yeah, and they seem to be that the Defense Intelligence Agency doesn't want a war in Syria because when they trained those rebels, they came out and said, "Oh, well, all of them defected to ISIS, and there's only 5 of them left." So they kind of were overt about the fact that this thing is failing, whereas if you turn to the CIA, they're continuing their program
Yeah,
unopposed.
you
So,
have to remember
I don't know.
that
It seems
the
I would be wary of people that say cut funding to something, but not the other.
the bureaucratic leadership in America the way that it's run is actually a little absurd because different presidents. So let me give you an example. Like our Supreme Court, you appoint somebody for life, and so you could have a Supreme Court justice from a different president while somebody else is president now. I'm not sure how the director of the CIA goes or how certain departments go, but I know that there is a layover time or like a lapse. So, for example, the leader of the Treasury, or not the Treasury, the Federal Reserve in America originally, let's say under Bill Clinton, was Alan Greenspan, who was Ronald Reagan's, and Bush's as well. But Clinton kept him. So it's funny because a lot of these bureaucrats serve different interests, and so they do conflict. America's it's a very interesting place, I'll say that. But I do remember talking to somebody about that recently. I think it might have been Senator Richard Black, who was on our last interview, but he did say that somebody, it escapes me right now, but somebody did say that the Pentagon and the CIA disagreed, because you have to remember that the CIA is the main weapon of the United States in overthrowing governments, and it has been since its inception in the late 40s after World War II when it was created. And it's funny, I wrote an opinion piece a couple weeks ago. The CIA, Joseph Mossad, who's a professor at Columbia, who's an expert on Middle Eastern politics, said and wrote a lot about how the CIA was involved in the 1949 coup in Syria.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
You can read about
Well,
it. I know Laith actually posted
I'm
something about it.
I'm going to definitely look it up. I mean, I know what they were doing in terms of the drugs and also what was happening with Mussolini. But yeah, they seem to be the main problem for Syria right now, in my opinion. Not so much the Pentagon, but the CIA.
Well, I'd say not even so much in Syria, but just across the whole region in general. I mean, we saw the brutal, NATO-led campaign against Gaddafi that saw him overthrown, and they thought that they could impose the same type of model in Syria, except I guess they completely underestimated the support that Bashar al-Assad would receive from...
and they underestimated Syrians in general, I think. Just Syrian people.
It's just the whole establishment has just taken completely underestimated the situation in Syria and how other countries would react. And I guess, they thought that through their own proxy in Saudi Arabia, which is effectively just an extension of American imperialism in the region, along with their friends in Qatar and Turkey and the United Arab Emirates, that they could just, impose a similar model on Libya and would be happy days for American imperialism. But, I guess as a focal point of the axis of resistance composing of Hezbollah and Iran, they just underestimated the level of support that the government would receive from its people and from its allies.
I have a question. Sorry, you're the interviewer, so you can but I just wanted to
finish up on that point real quick, sorry, and I'll let you ask your question after that. Yeah, I think it's funny. You said that the U.S. has underestimated. Tim Anderson said something similar to that to me as well, and it wouldn't be the first time. Every American who's taken a high school history class knows about the Bay of Pigs. We failed in Cuba. We certainly have failed other places. So it wouldn't be the first time. But I think what you guys were saying, I think the Pentagon has realized that. I don't think personally that people in the government, now I might be wrong and people might disagree with me on this, but I don't think that the people within the United States government have demonstrated any qualities of clinical insanity So I don't think that they really want the world to end, and I don't think they want to get tied up in a nuclear war. So I think they're kind of understanding that it's just not going to happen. And I think the CIA.
Yeah, I think that they probably would back down, but they're risking it nevertheless. They're happy to risk it, but.
Well, I certainly believe that now we are the most politically weak country. When I say we, I mean America. I think we are the most politically weak country in the world now. There was a recent poll a couple of years ago by Gallup, and I think some 30% of the world said that America was the biggest threat to security in the world. And the next person behind that was like 9%. It was Pakistan. Which was probably conflated by the amount of people that live in India. So,
on Mimi's point, it's easy to see, how a global conflict can easily emerge from American foreign policy in Syria. We've seen Turkey's escalation against Russia with the downing of the jet, and effectively NATO and the USA have completely backed Turkey and failed to essentially, put them back in their place. And we can see that with their build up on the border with Syria. Effectively they're ready to intervene in Syria, and Saudi Arabia have just recently, announced that they're happy to intervene and send in, ground troops to deal with ISIS. But,
I don't see it happening.
I can't see it happening either, but, just that very threat of it is quite scary.
I feel that basically the Saudi monarchy itself would be threatened if they try to do something so ridiculous, because the Saudi population actually has a lot of Wahhabis in it, and they would be supporters of ISIS, so they would risk an ISIS revolution, let's say, in Saudi Arabia against a monarchy that is, let's face it, not very Islamic, in spite of what they claim to be, putting in parachutes in handbags where, right in Mecca, they have McDonald's near Mecca, and Starbucks. There's many points that real Wahhabis would have a problem with when it comes to the gas station nation. But the other thing is they are facing an invasion from Yemen, because they started a war with Yemen, and little did they know that the people they were fighting would actually start to encroach inside Saudi Arabian territory. So I found it laughable that they would suggest it. Maybe if they did do it, I don't find it, even if they were to do it, I don't think it would be scary in any way. I think it would still be hilarious.
On Mimi's point, she's spot on. I mean, we've had people that were the head muftis of, the grand mosques in Saudi Arabia openly stating that, Saudi Arabia's brand of Salafism is virtually identical to ISIS. It was only a video released about a week ago. We've had several sheikhs and muftis coming out, in open support of, ISIS's brand of, Islam, which essentially is exactly what Wahhabism is. So, she does make a good point that if there was some sort of ground invasion of Syria to fight ISIS, supposedly, there would be huge internal, revolts, against such a move.
But do you really think, though, that people in Saudi Arabia actually give, that much care to radical Wahhabi Islam? Because a couple weeks ago, our guest Norman Finkelstein said quite eloquently, and I'm not going to say it on this program because I don't want you to hear it from my mouth. It's what he said, but and you can listen to that podcast. That's our second episode, and I would definitely encourage you to listen to it. But kind of to what the things that he said, do you really think though that would even be a popular revolution? Do you actually think people
not popular
actually
no,
believe that? They believe
most people don't care and don't believe. I mean, no, let me rephrase. Most people don't believe in Wahhabi values. Most people in Saudi Arabia wouldn't really care about politics. They would just care about their day-to-day lives, just like most other people. However, I will say that there seems to be a hotbed of specific Islamic leadership that has Wahhabi values that promotes it in specific mosques inside Saudi Arabia, and those are the people that also recruit people into ISIS and send them abroad. I guess I'm not talking about Saudi Arabia as a whole, but then you don't really need the whole country to go up, to join a revolt for problems to happen. If you have a minority of people that have a problem with the government and they start things, what tends to happen is that everybody else who's frustrated for whatever reason, which in Saudi Arabia, they have a lot of reasons to be frustrated about. I mean, the country is so repressive, people can't drive, men and women can't talk to each other. So, maybe they would be caught up in a wave. Who knows? I mean, they're not that stable a nation. Not everybody in Saudi Arabia is content. Maybe, maybe people on the other side would mistake it for, like a liberation. Maybe they would think, oh, we're gonna have more freedoms, and then, it's, instead of being I suppose, what do you call it? Not a revolution, but not a de-evolution either. Some people would, reactionaries. That's what I was thinking.
I would argue that there is a strong Wahhabi minority in Saudi Arabia, and that's only natural when we consider that we've got 3 or 4 generations since the establishment of the kingdom that have been indoctrinated with this ideology. We need to remember that Osama bin Laden was Saudi, and most of Al-Qaeda were Saudi that perpetrated 9/11. On top of that, one of the biggest groups of foreign fighters in Syria are Saudis. So there's definitely a strong undercurrent. Most of the Mujahideen fighters that were recruited to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, they were mostly Saudi themselves as well. So
they were recruited by the CIA, by the way.
Yeah, no, of course, I would definitely can't overlook that. But there's definitely a strong minority, I would argue, that can't be overlooked, and I guess that's only natural when we're talking about several generations of indoctrination of this puritanical, interpretation of Islam.
That's not to say that all Saudis think that way.
No, of course not.
That is a very loud minority, and maybe not minority enough either. Maybe it's a substantial number.
I keep using this Donald Trump. I swear, in the last couple interviews I've had, I always use him as an analogy because he is just, for some reason, it is so easy to compare him to these radical movements like ISIS and other groups around the world. But yes, so let's say
he has a strong voice.
Donald Trump supporters are a very, very loud minority. And
they want to turn over the tables.
It's very misleading. If you look at the numbers, it's very misleading to think that maybe these people, I say these people, and I mean these people, I stray from being individual about them. I don't know if they have a collective conscience or if they're individual people. I'm not really sure at this point anymore. But,
that's I guess you're American, so you're the only one allowed to have a real opinion on that. But for a Syrian, I don't see too much bad in Trump. From a Syrian perspective, foreign policy-wise, don't know anything about the domestic policy. Can't comment.
She would never be allowed to come here. Well, actually, I don't know. I don't know if you're Muslim or not. He wants to ban all Muslims, but if your name is Girl, I don't think that he would let you in.
That's okay. He can not let me in as long as he doesn't come and try to get himself into Syria.
As long as he doesn't try to come to your people. Hey, that's a fair trade, maybe I should support him
lock
so
his
I can move out,
door.
right?
Everybody's happy.
No, but if you look at the numbers of Donald Trump, his supporters, he has 40% nationally of Republican support. Well, you have to remember, Republicans are 40% of America, so 40% of 40%, what is that, 20% of people? Not even that, no, that's horrible math. It's between 10 and 20, I'll say that. I'm not going to pull out my calculator. Paul's laughing at me right now. But, we have touched on a lot of subjects here. We're going to wrap it up here and say 6 or 7 minutes. let's return to your activism. So at the end here, let's focus on you, Mimi. On you.
Let's know why you started the show and why you think it's become so popular.
Yeah, exactly. What is your show all about? Why did you feel the need to do it originally? I think you said it started in 2012, right?
Yeah, early 2012.
It was a year after the war had started.
Yes, and that, I suppose that was because the opportunity arose. Before the war started, I was an activist, but I was anonymous online, and I made it that way. I didn't want to be. My anonymity was very, very important to me. But when the war started, I suppose I had to sacrifice that. And in 2011, the protests and the shootings were starting in March, April. So things didn't really kick off. So I was sort of standing and wondering what's gonna happen. Is this thing gonna just fizzle out? But then it was only until late 2011, early 2012 that it really became like an armed insurrection. Whereas before, it was, at the beginning protests, and some people were firing at police. Then there was an incident in Jisr al-Shughur where the soldiers were slaughtered. There was like incidences, but not a full-on, like it became a lot more full-on late 2011, early 2012. And that's when I was interviewed by Morris 108, Morris, and I started my first interview with him. I tried to remain anonymous, and then the second one, I just thought, this is a sacrifice that I'm willing to make if I can really talk to people about what's actually happening on the ground, which the mainstream media at the time was pulling in Libya on Syria, and everything was just lies upon lies upon lies with no regard to any basis in reality. They were saying protests were happening when they weren't happening. People were dying. The next day they would come on TV and say, "I'm not dead." Things like that. So, yeah. So I basically had to make that sacrifice, and I didn't know how big it would get. But then somehow I made a video called Al-Qaeda is Al-Qaeda, and that resonated a lot with people. And that's how I got onto Alex Jones' show.
That's pretty clever.
Yes. That should have been the title of, well, we'll talk about that later. But, yeah.
No. You can talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. That should have been the title of X.
Yeah.
We won't talk about that. But, yes, that's when Alex Jones actually found my video, interviewed me.
So what happened after Alex,
Well, I had, just before Alex, I went and made my own channel because I wanted to talk about a phenomenon that was completely unrelated to Syria. And Morris, who I was doing interviews with, didn't want to talk about it. It was Coney 2012. It was huge, and I thought it was a brainwashing video, so I made some commentary about that on my own channel. So by the time I got onto Alex Jones, I told him to promote my channel on his show. And he did. The end. I mean, that's the end. It's a kind of not a very interesting story, is it? It's kind of, is it anticlimactic?
I think saying that Alex Jones helped you get your rise to stardom, I'd say that's a pretty cool story. Alex Jones.
Well, he helped. He certainly helped. He wouldn't be the only reason, because I was getting 100,000 views on Morris's channel in one of my videos. So that is also why he picked up on my existence. So I suppose, but he did help me in get bigger as well, as did others. Morris, I would say Morris, I wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for Morris. So.
Yeah, I think as a fan's perspective, and I've been following you since 2012, as you're fully aware, before, we've become friends.
If you're her fan, then why haven't you been fanboying?
Sorry, what was it? Sorry,
Why haven't you been fanboying?
Oh. Well, I think just as from as a fan's perspective, you really filled the gap in knowledge that that wasn't provided by most alternative media or mainstream media. So on the note of alternative media, usually the left wing will always try to justify certain conflicts as American imperialism at play, but for some reason, in the case of the Arab Spring and especially in Syria, they genuinely believed that all these uprisings were to remove these repressive leaders that were, not allowing people's rights. But they completely overlooked that these were systematic and, organized, regime changes. So, they completely missed what was happening in Syria. And then all of a sudden you come along and provide an alternative, worldview of what's going on in Syria. And I think people really reacted to that, just that gap of knowledge.
Talking about it, when I was mentioning Al-Qaeda, that was seen as a conspiracy theory in 2012. That there was no Al-Qaeda in Syria. That was the US's line. And people forget that. I mean, when I was on the Inside program and I talked about how these people are Al-Qaeda, the comments after that show was that girl, Mimi, is full of conspiracy theories. There is no Al-Qaeda, and this is all ridiculous. And then, even my professor at the time, after I did this show, he said, yeah, but you haven't really provided any proof that there's Al-Qaeda. And I said, I couldn't. I was on a television program and I had a few seconds to speak. So how could I provide proof? You have to look it up for yourself.
They only give you a couple seconds to respond and then they cut you off.
Yes, but then sometimes it's easy to forget what the zeitgeist was at the time, because now it's such common knowledge that Al-Qaeda is in Syria that it's easy to forget that only a few years ago, people thought I was crazy for saying that. And my professor later came to me and said, you were right all along.
And if we fast forward to 2016, we've even got the Free Syrian Army who are openly admitting that they're in an alliance with Al-Qaeda. I mean, it's not even hidden anymore by their own activists and by their own leaders that they're in alliance with. Yeah.
But the main point of my channel, I suppose, not all videos, but sort of the main theme of a lot of videos is how the US government is hypocritically and treacherously backing Al-Qaeda in all of these states. And it's underlined in Syria because that's where it's most obvious.
Paul, you mentioned that the left wing, say in Australia, as you mentioned, usually goes after these foreign policy blunders as saying that it's imperialism, it's American imperialism, and it's funny because it was the same thing in America because Hillary Clinton in the last debate was showing off about how she was one of the first people to say and was the person who orchestrated the whole funding of, quote, moderate rebels. She was showing off about that, okay? So it's actually a little terrifying. Now, we've been on the call for a pretty long time now, so let's wrap this up. I got one more question for you, Mimi.
Sure.
I hope you can answer this for me.
Absolutely.
On the Australian TV, you mentioned on the show, you mentioned that you wanted to be the leader of Syria. They asked
oh no,
who to be the leader of Syria, or who you wanted to be the leader of Syria, and you said yourself. So, can we get a confirmation that you will run for president?
I'm keeping my cards close to my chest for that one.
I want to get a statement from you because we're going to get this first. We're picking the story up right now.
If the people one day wish that I am president, I wouldn't say no. But at the time, the reason I answered that way was because she wanted me to tell her who, I backed, and I back my own opinions the most, I suppose. So I think I know what's best better than anyone. So I would have chosen myself. And also sorry, my voice is going, but I think she was cornering me, and that was my reaction to that, to break it with a joke kind of thing. So, but people have taken it very seriously. So if one day in the far, far future, the people have chosen me, I won't abandon my post.